this tithe that he gives in this moment is totally out of gratitude. This is me recognizing God's goodness in my life.
In our writings, it says after you conquer the land, meaning none of this will take place till after you conquer the land. What did Abraham do before giving Maser, the tithe? He conquered. See, we've been doing a number of these recordings, and hitherto, if I'm even saying that word right, there hasn't been a clear line between Christianity and Messianic Judaism in our conversations. Today, there is a very clear line. And the reason being is because, first of all, my approach to God is different, meaning this, and not to speak over your approach, that's for you to say. I am a representative of a land. Now, the land does not exist. Yes, there's Israel, but it's not the Israel of the Bible. So for most of us, we acknowledge one day in the future, Israel will come again. Jerusalem will come again. The Lord will come again. All things will be back in place. I am a representative of that land. So how I conduct myself. So then for me, I have to look at the way they take the tithe. I have to. Because if you're in error, I'm not permitted to be a part of that. Now, I agree with what you said, and it creates a bit of an issue. I agree with what you said, but did I feel like the Lord put me there? Well, now we got another problem. But I cannot assume that the reason the Lord put me there was not to speak out. So me and Elaine had an experience. I say it's her church because I go on her behalf to support my wife. But anyways, we're at church. We're going to become members. I need to communicate to my wife that I'm not going to have doctrinal issues with the preacher and say, no, we're out of here. She needs to be at a place that she can get, as she puts it, plugged in, involved, and all that. So we went to the membership course. Once you finish these membership classes, you had to sign an agreement on tenets of faith, of practice. One of them was concerning the tithe. And so when I read the rules on the tithe, I went to them afterwards. I said, yeah, I can't do that. I said, that's why I told them, I said, I'm Jewish. I can't, this doesn't line up with my beliefs and my doctrines. Now, we were fortunate that we went to a place where they said, yeah, we don't care. Do your thing. We don't care. Just come be a part of what we're doing. And so that worked out. But in good conscience, I had to let them know I can't do that. I didn't get into a biblical debate because I understand this is your house. I'm a guest in your house. Right. That's fine. But I had to let them know, as far as me and my household, we do this a bit differently. Now, just for the sake of this conversation, what we do is we split our tithe. I want my wife to be as Christian as she wants to be. But the rule is, let me be as Jewish as I want to be. So I'm single income. It's not, she brings in a little bit, but it doesn't pay the bills, let me put it that way. But she adds to our economy. And so basically we live off of my income. And so to honor her and her relationship with the Lord, then what I've done is, that you can't find in the Bible anywhere, by the way. I'm going to split it. You take half of my tithe and that's your tithe, and I'll take half of my tithe and I'll tithe. But we sit down and we converse. We have conversations over this, because I never want it to be a bucket plunker. But for me, I cannot line up with someone who doesn't at least try to hold to the spirit of the law, or the spirit of the word, as said in the New Testament, when receiving the tithe. So, for instance, like where we've gotten to a little bit of argument, it's not my responsibility to make sure the pastor drives the nicest car or lives in a gated community. It is my responsibility, however, to say that he's free enough to study the word day and night. That is my responsibility as a giver or as a tither. But so we're a little bit different on there. But the spirit, even if we go past the law concerning the tithe, we've always focused in our Torah study time on the spirit of the law, because we can't fulfill this law. The temple isn't there. Exactly. And it's based off of the land of Israel, which is not the same as the biblical. There's not a king of Israel over there right now. We're not making our sacrifices in the holy city of Yerushalayim and bringing our korban and our teruma that's not possible now. So then we try to look at the word and we look at the spirit. I will hold leaders accountable. My relation, so like I can respect what you're saying, don't get me wrong there, that based off of your relationship, to keep it intact, you have to close that door and say, you know what, God told me to give, I'm giving, that's it. I will answer. For me, in my relationship, if I know that something wrong is being done, I got to deal with that. Sometimes it can be, as what you point out, just as simple as me removing. And think about it. You can discuss tithing with leadership, and if they're dug in, that's the end of the conversation.
Right.
So then you've got to make a decision. So,
Mm.
but I think for each person, you have to look at now. So your ruling is tithing no matter what, whether you're poor or not, and no matter what they're doing with the tithe. My ruling is I don't think the poor should be paying tithe. If they want to, yes. So like with the little widow woman with the mite, if you want to, nobody should forbid that.
Right.
But to take it from then when we know that there's 2 years out of the 7-year cycle dedicated to sending that tithe their way, I got a big issue with that. Big issue.
Again, I put the onus on the giver, not the taker.
Yeah.
I don't believe anybody should be taking
right.
a tithe.
Right. I agree. Yes, I agree.
So
yes.
that's first.
That shouldn't happen because then it's a tax.
Exactly.
And so that's what I'm saying about the church that say you got to give 10%. That's not a tithe anymore. That's a 10% tax.
Yeah, right.
Because it's
At
mandatory.
this point, you just getting 10% off of your
they just
salary.
paid you 10% less. That's yeah.
It's just, yeah, but
we'll try to keep it right. Keep our minds right there. Yeah.
But to your point though about what people give, if that tithe can be time and talent and gifts, if you don't have money, because if you ain't got nothing, you ain't got
it. Yeah.
So then give what you got. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But to me, that's still giving a tithe. That's still worshiping God for what God has given you. If God has given you life and breath and ability, and that's all you have at the moment, then give your ability.
But let's be clear, it's a specific amount, whether it's time or talent. Right. I don't know how you would divvy that up in talent. I know how you divvy up that in tithe, because when me and Elaine started our lives together, we were poor, we were on welfare. And so I'd literally think about, did 10% of my time go to my local body? Because I didn't have the money to give either. But the thing that I point out on the taking side, and I do think, I don't think you're in error on the giving side. I don't think that at all. But I think the people who take the tithe are in error. And I do have an issue of that, not an issue that I don't judge them or condemn them, because ultimately, if everyone is assuming together as a community of faith, and if that is agreed upon by the community, and someone says, yes, this is my leader, and especially if they say, for the Lord told me so, then stop being rebellious and do what they tell you to do. I want to be crystal clear on that. You don't badmouth them at that. No. This is so for you, for instance, if by what you said, I don't look past once I give it. That's between them and the Lord. The Lord will deal with them. Then you would be completely out of line now by saying, well, now I'm looking and I got a problem with you. If you know what I mean? Because I would say that at most communities of faith, that kind of is the agreement. It's just that you give, period. It's a pretty basic doctrine within the church. Right. You give 10% of your income and that's it. But for me, I can read in this Torah portion that the priests received the basket. So it wasn't your 10% that they were dealing with. They severed that line. Right. That's your 10% in what you're giving, but they knew this is dangerous ground, put it in a basket. I'll take the basket, we put it before the altar, and then they do what they need to do it with it there.
So to your point, I think it's very, I find myself kind of torn as well about those who receive that tithe and offering and the responsibility they have, because there's clear instruction about what God expects to have done with that.
Yeah.
And if that's not happening, then yes, they may very well be in error or are in error, because if they're not doing what God said do, then what you doing?
Yeah.
Right. At the same time, I'm looking at the realities of this country we live in, and we live in a democratic capitalist society that whose economy does not honor people, God, nothing. The only thing honored is money.
Yeah.
So to be clear, if you don't know, if you're not from here, let me tell you, it's about the dollar.
Yes, it is very much.
And so trying to create an environment and a situation and an opportunity to do it exactly as it is in this text with that reality is complicated. Not impossible. By any means, not impossible. But
But by
the cultural context makes it difficult.
By complicated, and again, we by the letter of the law, it's impossible. By the spirit of the law, it's complicated. But to me, I hear that as you have to be intentional with it.
Exactly.
It's not something that should be an automated response. And matter of fact, for a while, and it created all kinds of let's say complications in the household trying to do this. We have a separate bank account for our masir, for the tithe. And so where it got really bad is like, no. I want to bring it in the house. I want to recite the bracha as given in scripture to recite over that basket of masir. And then we'll give it after that. That I like doing that. I really did like doing that. It is the most unpractical thing to do, if I could be honest with you. You can do it for a minute and then life gets in the way and then you come back. But to do it consistency, I don't think that it's wrong to do that based off of it was hard for me to do. But I do think it's wrong at least not to come together, in my case with my wife, in your case with your wife, and recite a blessing over what you're about to do, over your intention and sanctifying that intention. And so, but my thing is for us, so for you, your efficacy is in the act of obedience. I do believe in efficacy in the act of obedience, but I also believe in the efficacy of the mitzvah itself. That's where we kind of do this, because if I can't see that at least provision was made for the word to accomplish what it was set out to do, it's just not really something that I want to be a part of. And where I do have to be careful is I'm very careful about assigning intent, because then you get into a spiritual side of lashon hara, speaking ill of someone else, or even bearing false witness. So I do have to be careful on assigning intent, but we've got a trust problem now. So I'm giving the tithe according to Scripture, but you're not receiving the tithe according to Scripture. Yeah, and then so that creates a bit of a trust thing.
One of the things that we talked about earlier before we started recording was the importance of this. That one part of the scripture that I shared in Deuteronomy 14:22, where it says, "Thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed." Well, that implies that you've been aware of the increase, that you've been taking account.
Yes. Yeah. You're accounting. Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Of how God is blessing you and throughout an entire season, so that by the time you reach this time where you are supposed to give an accounting, you actually know the increase that God has given.
Yes.
If you're in that state of thought, if you are practicing that and that discipline of giving an account of what God is doing for you on a regular basis, it's kind of hard not to want to give something back. Because you can't receive all that blessing and know all that blessing and see all that blessing. And when he gives you the list of the things, when he gives you the list of the things that they place in the tithe of thy corn, thy wine, thy oil, the firstlings of thy herds and of thy flocks. Yeah, when you're seeing these things increase, right, and God is blessing the works of your hands and blessing and increasing all of everything that you pour into the environment He's placed you in. And then you get to this place where, okay, now it's time for me to return something to Him, to acknowledge His goodness in my life. That, to me, that is why I assume the posture I do when it comes to giving back. You know, and it's that practice, that thought, that discipline. And I think it's what, for those who do tithe, is what makes it easier to give, because we're mindful of the thing that God's been doing. And we've been observing His hand over our life and the evidence of His goodness in our life. Okay. And we can, so the increase.
Well, I'm going to say, because you've been using this is like the fourth time you've used the word increase. So there's two things I want to touch base on. One is before or after taxes. And the other one is prove me now herewith. So what say you tax? Do you tithe before or after? Because in this, you really are talking about the increase. And even when you go outside the law and you talk about Melchizedek and Avram and you talk about Yaakov, we're still talking about increase. Right. We're talking about a little bit outside of the realm of responsibility in this case. So where do you stand the tithe before? Or and now, if this will get you in trouble, don't answer it because I don't want to get you in trouble.
My wife is sitting right off camera.
Well, I'm thinking about your pastor too, so with your wife and your pastor.
Right. So,
because you can believe one way and do another in obedience to the structure. I understand that.
Right. So, the reality of that, some people tithe based upon what they get.
Mm-hmm.
Other people tithe based upon what they know they received before the government took their piece of the
part.
pie.
Yeah.
And
which, by the way, is a tithe of sorts.
Right.
It is an amount that is taken from you for the betterment of humanity, whether you agree with it or not. But I'm saying that's
because I would argue that's what the government is doing with it again.
Yeah. But some of it's, but to your point of what you were saying earlier about the tithe, not that. So when you say that, that I believe I should give the tithe, and if they misrepresented it, then that's a different deal. Well, that's what taxes are. We don't get to pick and choose what our taxes go, but some of our taxes go to keep the roads working. Right. Some of our taxes go to educate our children. Right. Some of our taxes go to make sure we don't get shot. Hopefully, in a
or
dark
at least
alley.
somebody to find out who did it.
Yeah. Yes, so that there's justice in the world.
Right.
So some of our taxes go for bad things. Some of our taxes go to good things, and that's how I am able to even separate that out further, because I don't look at the tithe that way. But nonetheless, so you don't get to pick and choose on where it goes, but it's still overall. We're tied. Our structure is set up in this government, and in most governments now, I would say just what difference is the amount that's taken. You kind of already paid a tithe by the time you get to the bucket plate, to help the fatherless, to help the widow, to help the poor, to help the uneducated, all of these things. But anyways, back to the tithe. Are you pre-tax or post-tax?
I honestly believe that people should make that decision for themselves.
On their own. Okay. All right.
Because if you feel the way I feel, you're looking at and examining what the government does with our money, a large percentage of that isn't taking care of the fatherless, the widow, or the foreigner. As a matter of fact, the government is antagonizing foreigners in many parts of this country.
Very much so.
And education is constantly being undermined and underfunded. Yeah. While they are quick to build prisons and quick to spend money to get into, military misadventures in other parts of the world, the responsibility for the citizens of this country are not a financial or fiscal priority for the leadership of this country on the scale that it should be. Yeah. And the suffering we see is the evidence of that. Yeah. So for me, in my house, the taxes are not a tithe because there's nothing godly.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you.
But other folks feel differently. There are plenty of Americans who are very satisfied with how they.
So we are a post-tax household, and the reason being is because I have no control. It's not a tithe because they take it from me. I don't have a choice. Right. I will be arrested if I don't give the government their money. So then my income is past that. Now, if I were to go further and we don't, I would say after I paid the house bill, after I paid the car bill, we don't do that. We pay before those things, but we do after taxes because that's money that we get to make decisions about. Right. And we make decisions whether we pay the mortgage or the car. But most of Scripture is based off of that in that profit margin. And I don't have this memorized, but the kesafim, which is tithing from profits, is just that. It's a tithe from profits. So even the rabbis that talk about, well, we need to, because we know if we're going to have houses of worship, we know we got to pay into it. That's just the bottom line. Mm-hmm. Unless a multimillionaire says, hey, this one's on me, come as you are. But that's a problem for another reason, though. If you're paying into a system, you're a part of that system. As a matter of fact, what we're taught to think of when given tithes is the fact that we are not citizens of this world. There's different jobs I've had where I've worked with immigrants, and we would inevitably get on to conversations about finances and this, that, and the other. Matter of fact, one lady told me her family was in India, and this is way back when we were still in poverty, but our poverty line was their wealth line. Right. And so I'm a fast food cook. And she's telling me that she works. This is what I need to pay for rent. I ride my bicycle to work. The rest of it goes home to India. And she said, one day I'm going to retire and I'm going to have servants there. So I'm thinking, how in the world? But their economy was different. But that's exactly the approach that we're taught, in that we're not citizens of this place and we're actually sending money back home to the kingdom as being members of the kingdom. And so the money, but that's why it's also so important to me that finances is used to build the kingdom. That's actually what it's for. It's really not for anything, whether it's for the building to keep the lights on so people can congregate together and worship, or whether in Sunday in the synagogues is the Hebrew school and Torah school and all that, whether it's to educate people or whether it's to lift up the poor, it's to build the kingdom. Now, we go a little bit further. This is getting outside of tithe into offerings. I do not require someone to have heard the gospel of Yeshua for me to give an offering to that. If it is in the name of justice, if it is in the name of righteousness, meaning what is right, then I'm compelled. I can give to that. It doesn't just have to be about, because I know places that, well, if they ain't teaching Jesus, I'm not going to be a part of it. Well, from my vantage point, that's a little bit of what's wrong. If I can get you centered and thinking about what is good, we can now have a dialogue about what is good,
right?
And who is the Father of good, who is the provider of good. But if it's a world in the condition that it is now, where it's kind of every man for themselves, we're going to have a hard time even having a conversation, So for me, I would say most of our, if not all of our right now, our offerings and tithing do go to ministry-based, both Jewish ministries and Christian ministries or organization. That's not necessarily a requirement. But having said that, then we're getting into offering and not necessarily tithing. So I don't have any issues giving offering wherever I want to give offerings, so long as it's promoting. It doesn't have to be in the name of God, but it's got to be promoting godlike conduct. And that's just more of, now that's not an offering to the Lord. I should be clear on that. I'm not counting that as part of my offering to the Lord. It's just, I don't have a problem with giving to those things.